So, me and Adam are socially distancing and we're having a look in the woods to see what we can eat. Adam, we're walking along. What are some of the main principles, do you think, of being safe or respecting where you're picking?
So there's a few key principles to have when gathering wild food. The first one is to be absolutely 100% sure that what you're picking, you know what it is, because there are some quite highly toxic plants out there which look similar to ones which are very tasty. And the last thing you want to do, of course, is have that confusion, pick the wrong thing, and then get in trouble. So the absolute first key rule is to definitely be 100% sure you know what you're picking. Otherwise, move on and find something that you are sure about. The next one is working in harmony with the natural world and your local environment. So not going to an area and just completely stripping it of all the plants, all the flowers, fungi, whatever you're out gathering. And it's just being, just quite sensitive to the area. So only really taking what you need for that day, maybe just the next two, maybe a bit more if you're going to do some preservation, but do it that day, drying, that kind of stuff. And also making sure that you leave enough for other creatures and then the plants themselves to continue growing, and then they can reproduce, and then that gives them a chance to continue as well.
What have we found, Adam?
Okay, so this one is one of the, shall we say, favourites of the foragers, sort of gathering snacks along the way. This is pennywort, or navelwort as it's also known. And this one is really good in salads. Cooking it is quite a succulent plant, so cooking it doesn't work quite so well. But it's really good to just pick, and you can nibble on the way, or you can really pad out a salad using that plant. It's got a nice sort of watery feel to it.
This one?
That's the one. Again, going back to those foraging principles. So if you look sort of down here towards the bottom end, this is what we essentially call the dogweed zone. So when you're gathering wild plants, you want to think about where you're gathering from and what may have contaminated the plant. So you really generally want to be gathering above hip height, and things where dogs can't get to.
Good plan.
Also being aware of things like pesticides, if they've been sprayed, so public parks may be sprayed, edges of farmers' fields, and also if there's maybe old metalwork sites or various industrial sites where plants are now growing, they may be absorbing some of the contamination. So just being mindful of where you're gathering from. So with these ones, I'm going to be gathering a bit higher up, and so you can see these round leaves here. These are the prime leaves that you want to be gathering. As they start to elongate at the flower stem, they start to get a bit more bitter. So it's the ones kind of earlier in the spring, or before they've gone to flower. And this particular plant is quite shallow rooted. So again, being mindful of gathering things in accord with ensuring that they can continue their own life. It's a case of just carefully plucking it, holding the plant and take one off, as opposed to manhandling it out, because otherwise the whole root system might come out, and that's the end of the plant's life. And one final thing with pennywort, it's worth just turning it over, just checking underneath, because you may have the odd snail or small creature that might be living there. So just checking that it's clean, there's nothing living on it, that you've gathered it safely and sustainably, and you can have a go at eating it.
I think I demonstrated how not to check underneath.
Okay. So who knows what you've got?
Yeah. So we've just found some nettles, and Adam's found evidence of...
Oh yeah, some foragers already been here before us. So here they've picked the tops out the nettles, which is the way you want to gather this plant. So looking at this patch of nettles here, you've got some which are pre-flowering and some which are going into flower. The ones you want to get are the ones before flowering, so like this one over here, you've got these small, long, kind of quite fluffy little stems coming out. These are the flowering stems, so I'm going to be looking for one which doesn't have that, so maybe a bit further in. And you want to be gathering the fresh leaves, so it's really the top 4 to 6, and of course with the name stinging nettles, they're going to sting, so you've got to be like grasping the nettle almost. A quick firm grasp from below, pluck it off, and you're generally okay without getting stung. I can see here a small creature on there, so it's just a case of just knocking that off and doing a bit of just checking beforehand, before putting it into the bag or the basket or whatever thing you've got. And yeah, nettle is great for things like you can stir fry it, you can make a soup, and the one thing you want to do is put it onto heat, because that's the one thing that's going to stop the stinging. So it's definitely applying it to heat. So I wouldn't have this in a salad, certainly not raw, unless you're going to be crunching it up and having it as a bit of a token nibble. But otherwise, it's a case of cooking the nettle. But this one is great for nutrition. It's a real nutritional powerhouse. It's got a real good amount of plant protein, high amounts of vitamin C, there's a lot of iron in there, some vitamin A, and a lot of calcium. So this one, although it's a bit tricky to gather without gloves, maybe gloves and scissors can help with that, but I'd say this one is a real good one to get into your diet because it's going to be packed full of nutrients, and you can, quite versatile in mixing it through soups and stews in various ways to get it in and get a real good hit of nutrition.
Winner, winner, stinging nettle dinner. What have we found, Adam?
So again, it's another highly prized plant in the foraging world. We found a real good stand of wild garlic. So this one is one of the ones in the foraging world where you'll see on Instagram or various groups where people find the first wild garlic leaf of the year, and there's quite that excitement and the buzz because the flavour of this particular plant is just quite exquisite. It's a really strong, almost spicy, tangy garlic flavour. Really holds its own in various forms of cooking. Quite distinctive now. So when it's a bit younger, there's a possibility to confuse it with a couple of other plants. So again, it's just being mindful of being 100% sure of what you're gathering. But the one thing that really gives this away is that really strong garlic smell. Once you crush the stem and smell it, you're not going to make any confusions with that. So it has these long, almost like rabbit ear type leaves. These leaves are almost going slightly over now. They're not quite as young and vibrant as they were. And again, you can see with the flowers coming out. So all the energy is put into producing the flowers and eventually the seeds. But they're still good eating. So again, these are great raw or cooked. But for me personally, if I am going to cook it, it's put into the dish right at the end. One, so you're not going to potentially spoil any nutrients. But two, just so you keep that strong flavour. But as a salad leaf, it's amazing. It's quite abundant, and here's a good place to gather. Again, with the idea of not over harvesting, you can just take a few leaves throughout the whole area, essentially, so you can leave the area like you haven't been at all. Just a few here and there. And again, with how strong the flavour is, you don't need many.
Right, we've just come out of the woods, and Adam found it really some sticky willy. I always call it sticky willy, but Adam, maybe you could tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, so this one to me is known as cleavers or goosegrass, and it's the one, as Joel demonstrated, you probably threw at your friends as children. It's quite fun in that regard, but also as a wild food, it's also another particularly potent one, or at least as a wild tea. It's really high in vitamin C, but it's a really good spring tonic, so really good at cleansing the lymph system and detoxifying or aiding that process. And just keeping yourself really healthy during those spring months. As it goes into the summer months, you'll see some small seeds growing on there, and they can be picked, dried and roasted and used as a coffee type substitute, which is quite nice. But for me, this one really holds its own as a tea. So for me, what I do is gather the tips. So again, gathering it sustainably rather than just ripping the whole thing out, holding the base and taking the tops off. Again, allowing the plant to continue to grow, and allowing anything else that may be living or feeding on it to do that. Again, this time of year coming into summer, you may see small little bits of almost look like spit. It's called cuckoo spit, and that's a small insect living on there. So again, just being mindful to look at the plant before you gather it, so you're not again harvesting anything that's already living on there. And this one's really good for juice. So I'd personally stuff a cafetiere or a teapot full of it, put it in the boiling water, leave it overnight, and then the next day have that cold as a morning drink. But just to kind of give you an idea of how much goodness is in there, if you start to crunch it up, if you maybe get your wheatgrass shots from your favourite health food shop, you can come out to the countryside and get your own free nutritious wheatgrass shots. So you start to crunch it up, give it a good crunch, and then you can start to get all of the juices out. A bit more crunching, hang on.
Mm-hmm.
To really give it a good old juicing, and what feels like quite a dry, sticky plant, we should produce this really nice green, really moreish, deep flavoured liquid, and it's delicious.
What have we got, Adam?
Okay, so if we come down here a bit, you see these very distinctive flower seed clocks, the dandelion flowers, which have got to seed, and then next to it, the bright yellow flower, which is also quite distinctive and a bit of a flag to show that you've got the plant you're looking for. As far far as identifying dandelion, you've got these very distinctive leaves with these kind of almost lion's teeth, quite jagged, pointy leaf. And these leaves are great eating for either raw or cooked again, like a lot of these plants. So they're really high in potassium, which is great. Also some good calcium in there too. And great in salads, maybe chopping them into a salsa. You also have, they can go into soups or stews, any way you want to get them in really. And similar to, I'd say, with the wild garlic, if you're going to be cooking them, I'd say put them in towards the end just so you can retain more of those nutrients. But it's just a very versatile green, kind of get in as and where you can. But also the flowers. So you can also eat the flower heads. The unopened buds can be pickled, but you can just pop these off and again put them into things like into salads, of course, raw. But just being mindful again with the idea that these are what then go into seed, and then you want to make sure that the plants can continue on and other things can feed too. A real good source of nectar for insects. We are on the roadside verge, so again just thinking about where you're gathering from. This might not be the ideal spot to be gathering these from, purely because you've got lots of the exhaust from the traffic and all those kind of things, also in the dogweed zone. So again just being mindful where you're gathering from.
Can we dig the roots up, Adam?
Well, yes and no. So insofar as the legislation around wild plants, there is some legislation that states that you can gather wild flowers and wild plants, but for your own consumption as opposed to for commercial gain. However, you can only uproot plants if you have the landowner's permission. So personally, I couldn't gather them here, but if you've got a garden full of dandelions and you want to get rid of them, then get them up and get them eaten. Just get the roots out, give them a good scrub, you can chop them up and put them in a stir fry, you can dry them, put them into small pieces and then roast them, and that can be a good old coffee substitute, or just roast them with some garlic and have a nice addition to your Sunday lunch. So again, another really versatile, really nutritious plant, and again, if you've got it in your garden, a great chance to make some good use of it.
Nice one, Adam. We've just finished our little foraging experiment adventure, and Adam, is there any last words you'd like to say?
I think the main thing just to remind you about is to have that thought in your head, to just be 100% clear about what you're gathering is what you think you're gathering. There's no having a little nibble or having a little taste just to see. It's because there are some things out there which can be really quite deadly, so it's just having that 100% certainty. But also just having a go. There's some plants which we all know, the nettle, the dandelion, the dock, and some new ones learnt today hopefully with the pennywort, which are very obvious, very easy to identify, and really good, nutritious and tasty. So I think just having a good go, and getting them into your meals. And if you want to maybe check out a couple of additional recipes, my website is ramblerspantry.co.uk. So again, there's a recap of the general principles just to kind of make yourself safe with foraging. Again, a couple of recipes about how you can use these plants. And I think a couple of additional places. There's eatweeds.co.uk, where there's a wealth of recipes too. Real good forager Robin Harford. There's Wild and Curious Foraging, so Myrtle Cooper based down in South Devon. So some really good people around Devon doing some really good stuff with plants, so I'd say check them out too. But yeah, get out there on your walks, on your shopping trips, and gather some wild stuff to add into your meals.
Cheers, Adam.